Hi, my name is Jonathan Dickstein. I am the Vice President of your Intermountain Iyengar Yoga Association, and I'm also a teacher in Denver and Boulder. Today we're going to do a short sequence of poses that's for opening up the hip joints, you could say, and what I mean by that is where the legs insert into the pelvis. So when people talk about hip openers or things like that, sometimes it can be misleading, but by and large this is for addressing a lot of the muscles that work with the attachment of the leg bone of the femur into the socket. So the first pose will be a simple cross-legged position, Svastiāsana, Auspicious-Pose, with the feet under the knees. So not the feet drawn back, but actually the feet forward right under the knees. Now I'm going to get the forward extension going forward from the lower pelvic joint, not from where my waist meets the pelvis, which means whether I'm sitting on a floor or on a blanket, I need to be able to draw the buttock bones back a bit, get this hollowing forward, this hollowing all the way at the lower pelvic joint, and then hinge forward. In this position, I relax my hips, my knees, my ankles. Let the sitting bones descend towards the floor, but at the same time extend forward. Back up. And change the cross. Opposite leg in front. Once again, we can shift the sitting bones and the buttocks back a bit to get this hinge hollowed and deepened, and then I stretch forward once again. Now lying down, at first we'll work with a very simple, a very common position of the legs. So I'm going to cross my ankle over my shin, making this figure 4 shape. And then I lift the other leg and interlock my fingers behind the thigh or the shin bone. It really doesn't matter so much, but what I don't want to do is have to lift up to do so. So I find a place to grip that's accessible. I relax the shoulders down. I keep my chest and collarbones open. And keeping the pelvis by and large on the floor, the sacrum pretty much on the floor, I'll start to bring this ankle towards me. So more than anything else, I want to think about the ankle coming towards the same shoulder. Release. Now from this angle, you can notice that in this movement, there's a tendency for the knee to want to come towards the chest. So on this side, one way to address that is when I start to bring this leg towards me, I can release my hand and gently push this knee away from my body so that the knee and the ankle start to become more in a straight line and the shin bone more parallel with my chest. So this kind of movement. Now if I want to do it while I have the interlock, I simply use my elbow and press against the inner knee when I start to bring the ankle but once again towards the shoulder. So as the shin comes towards my chest, as if I'm tucking myself in with my own shin. Now, continuing from that, Supta Gomukhāsana, reclining cow-faced pose, just the legs. So in this position, I started in figure 4, but now I cross the leg all the way over. So the knees are on top of one another, reach up, and interlock at the far shin bone, if possible. And once again, without lifting up, without lifting the hips off the floor or the pelvis off the floor, I'll bring the knees towards myself here. Release. And change sides. Watch, I start here and let the legs slide all the way over. Reach up, interlock around the far shin bone. And then once again, let the shoulders descend, the chest stay open. And then I bring my legs towards myself. Softening with the breath, relaxing even more so with the breath. But without tensing up as I use my arms, I'm certainly using my arms to help facilitate the movement of the knees towards myself. Then release. So then one more in this cycle. So begin with this cross. Now I cross over again, and now Supta Garudāsana. Lying down, eagle pose, just the legs. If I can, I lift up and I pass the foot behind the lower leg. So I have this full entwining all the way of the bottom leg. If it's not possible, then you can just press the outer foot against the outer shin here, or go back to what we did a moment ago. But now I interlock all the way, once again clasp the far shin, lie back, and draw the legs towards us. I'm holding these for a very brief period, but you can certainly extend that to a few minutes for each side. Same idea. Here, and I cross to that cow-face pose, the Gomukhāsana position, and then fully entwine for Garudāsana, eagle pose, legs. Right. Stretch your legs out for a moment, press them to the floor, open up the knees, release the knees. Next will be a kind of preparation pose, called a preparation for Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana, sometimes called Godhāsana, the pose of the iguana. Here I have a couple blankets nearby if necessary, and I can enter this pose from Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. So I stretch back at first, then step my foot to the opposite wrist and sit back or sit down in this position. The position of the knee and the foot should be in a line, similar to the position a moment ago of bringing the shin bone towards the chest. However, because of a tendency for this pose to topple or do various things based on one's degree of flexibility or stiffness, I can use 1 or 2 or 3 blankets underneath the bent leg hip. But what I want to be sure of is that one is when I come to the position, the bent leg knee is not inside the hip, but in line with the hip, if not slightly outside of it, and the front foot, if possible, is in line with the knee. Not this position, but drawing the foot forward. And that may, in fact, necessitate the use of the blankets. Right? So instead of modifying the pose this way, I'll keep the foot as it is, as much as possible, and then support my bent leg buttock here, in this position. Then, with the same side arm that the foot is on, I'll stretch forward, and as I do so, really try to turn the pelvis, this hip, so that it faces the floor, so I'm not leaning off to the side. And I reach forward, and if possible, stretch the other arm forward as well. I release and step to dog pose, downward facing dog, Adho Mukha. Now just to show from this angle, notice how I place myself so that as much as possible, not just my chest, but even my hip is starting to turn forward and face straight forward. So I'm not off to the side in this kind of position. Bring the foot forward, support my hip as necessary. Stretch forward with the same side arm. This will really help descend the hip of this side, really balance the pose, and go forward. If I'm having trouble keeping myself steady, I can always keep this hand here to counterweight me back to the side that I'm starting to kind of list away from. If I have that stability, I can take both arms forward. So next will be a series of 3 poses in a sequence called Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana, lying down, holding the big toe pose. There are 4 in total. We'll do 3 in this sequence of poses. And it requires a belt. And for the first one, I'm just going to make a big loop in the belt. Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana 1, reclining big toe pose 1. I recommended first using the belt in what I sometimes call a kind of subway strap or bus strap configuration, which means it's doubled around the ball of the foot, and I hold in the loops, kind of like a subway strap that you would hold on to. Now, at the beginning, I'm not going past 90 degrees. I start at 90 degrees with a straight leg in the air and one straight leg lying on the floor. If you find yourself that this is too challenging to take it to 90 degrees, firstly, you can bend the bottom leg to start, or you can take off one of the belts and lower the leg a bit and hold this belt in what I refer to as kind of a horse reins configuration. But if possible, stay with the subway strap position. And at first, I'm not worried about bringing the leg towards myself. I extend through my bottom leg, press the thigh towards the floor. This will stay consistent for these poses. And in my top leg, I really work on firming the quadricep, drawing the kneecap into the leg, really making the knee straight as it were, and opening up at the back of the knee. Then after a while, I can start to use the exhalations, and not really in a strong pumping action, but a gentle pumping action. Start to exhale, and bring the leg towards myself. Inhale, exhale, towards myself. So there's not that much movement. It's a slow, controlled movement, starting to encourage some openness in the back of the leg. And then after a few, I can pause the exhalation and remain there as I breathe. As I do so, notice how my bottom leg has stayed rooted down to the floor. Release. Change legs. Notice as I do this, I'm bending my elbows to the side so that the chest is open and my collarbones broad. I'm not hugging the arms in. You should feel very spacious, both in the legs and the chest, so that the breath comes easy. And release. So the next one, Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana, lateral, out to the side, is a little tricky, but the use of the belt is extremely helpful in doing so. So watch, I make a loop at the end of the belt, like so. When I lie down, this will just be perhaps a good angle for you to see. I put the belt around the ball of the foot. Now watch, I pass the belt around the back of my head, and I'm holding the tail in the far side hand. This loop should be big enough that I have to kind of reach, but I should be able to get my hands in the loop. What this is going to do is this hand is going to guide the leg laterally out to the side, and this hand is going to help keep it elevating in the direction of my shoulder. So as I root down through the grounded leg and keep it firmly pressing down, I continue to stretch my upward leg and guide it up and out to the right. Up and out to the right. Eventually coming to a point where I can put my elbow on the floor. And now I'm going to use my right elbow on the floor, and as I press, I'm going to start to lift my shoulder blade off the floor, turn my chest to the left, and really see if I can roll the trunk towards the left, and especially keep this far side hip moving towards the floor. So I'm not trying to topple the pelvis, I'm really trying to open up the leg as I take it to the side. And then back up. You can pull it a little towards myself, like in the first pose, and release. So now from this angle, a different angle. So in this position, my bottom leg presses down to the floor, and now I use this elbow pressing and really try to roll the body in the opposite direction as the extended leg. Now, one more is called Parivṛtta Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana, revolving, or taking the leg across the midline. So now, the belt is around my first foot to start, but I reach for the loop in a cross grip. And I put the belt around the same side that my hand is reaching from. So it's the opposite hand and the opposite side of the head. Now it's as if I have a huge clock face in front of me, and I'm going to go in stages out to the side. It'll become more apparent when I show on the second side. So from here, I press my bottom leg into the floor, and I first take my leg to the side just a little bit, keeping both of my sitting bones on the floor, and I pause. And I re-stretch the extended leg, the upward leg. Now I go a little bit further, letting my hip lift off the floor, but at the same time still extending my bottom leg and pressing it to the floor. Now in the final position, or the last position, my bottom leg is going to start to rotate with me. My pelvis rotates until I place my elbow on the floor here. And then I do the same thing. I use the elbow pressing into the floor to catalyze a counter current of the body in the opposite direction. So I press, roll the trunk away from the leg, but still try to take the leg up and out to the side. Back up. So once again, from this angle, so if you can imagine a clock face in front of yourself when you do it, and this is 12 o'clock, you'll go to 1, 2, and eventually 3. So now, when I go to 1 o'clock, my sitting bone is still on the floor, just going a third of the way, and I take a few breaths here. It depends how long you hold the pose for, then how long you'll hold it at each stage. Now I go a little bit further, letting my hip lift off the floor, but my bottom leg still pressing straight down into the floor. And then eventually I keep going until 3 o'clock. My leg is pretty much parallel to the floor. And then I use my elbow to press and really turn the trunk away from the rotating leg, with the leg going out to the side. So those are 3 Supta Pādāguṣṭāsana poses. Now I'll sit in Gomukhāsana, classic position. Lying down, we did it earlier, but now in the seated position. As before, I have one knee stacked on top of the other. And in this variation, I'm going to try to keep the feet as close together as possible. As close together as possible, pointing back when I sit back. I sit attempting to keep the feet close to one another, and if necessary, for stability, placing a blanket between the buttocks and the heels. if it's necessary. Otherwise, sitting upright, and then taking Gomukhāsana arms. If you saw the video on the shoulder openings, this was a part of that as well. So now, just so you see the leg position, it looks like this. The knee behind the knee and the feet together as much as possible when entering the pose. So I sit back. Now, if you feel like it's impossible to sit back, you can also begin to let the top foot slide slightly out to the side. Just enough that you can be able to sit back but not feel like you're slouching so far back. You could also use the blanket as support as well. And once again, entwining the arms in Gomukhāsana. Now, a slightly different variation of Gomukhāsana, sometimes called Gomukhāsana 3 position, is a little bit different with the legs. In this position, I pass the knees behind the knees, but now I'll separate my feet completely and sit between the heels. Now, when you do this, especially if you find the knees lifting and the body kind of gravitating, getting magnetically drawn backwards, then it will be absolutely essential to raise the height of the buttocks. Why? So that once again, when I hinge forward, I get this lower hinge, this bottom hinge of the pelvis where the legs insert into the pelvis to extend forward. So whether on the blanket or on the floor, I clasp my bottom knee at first, and then I bend my arms and go forward. If your chin comes to the knee or past the knee, and you feel like you can use the arms more effectively by stretching them, then you extend the arms forward here. Again, I sit up, I have a nice tight cross at the knees. I'm not sitting on either of the heels. And then at first clasping the bottom knee, I use my arms. It's very similar to the action on the back where you pull the legs towards yourself, but now I'm pulling myself towards the legs. And either remaining here or eventually stretching the arms forward. And then releasing the legs. So now we'll sit in Virāsana. Virāsana, hero's pose, is a position where the feet are separated and I go to sit between the heels. So, I'm sitting between the heels with the feet facing back. At first, this isn't so easy. So we can employ a block or a blanket. And I'm just going to use it between the heels but under the sitting bones. So it's not very far forward. It's really back. And as I sit, I take hold of my calves and push them backwards and roll them out slightly so I can sit on the block without the calf flesh in the way. Now what will be essential in the next few poses is the position of the pelvis relative to the floor. So if once again there's this kind of position of the pelvis with the tailbone getting drawn very far under and the sacrum in the rear on a slant to the floor, I have to lean forward, hold the buttocks with my fingertips and pull it back and try to place the sitting bones down in such a fashion that I can ground them and be on the front of the sitting bones when I sit upright in Hero's Pose Virāsana. Especially if this is challenging, you want to stay on the support for a few minutes. Don't really let the ankles and the knees and the hips get acclimated to the position. Then if you start to get more comfortable and kind of make the pose actively, you can remove the block and place your hands on your heels. And watch, I'm going to use my hands kind of as a brake and use maybe a few exhalations. And start to lower myself, coax myself, encourage myself. You tell the joints, it's okay, you're slowly entering the pose. Until eventually you can sit on the floor comfortably, relatively comfortably at first. In Hero's Pose Virāsana. And those of you who are quite comfortable in this pose, or can sit on the floor, can also spend a few minutes in Supta Virāsana, lying down Virāsana, which means I lean back. Now I do tuck the tailbone deeply under, lengthen my front thighs, and lie back. Eventually extending my arms overhead. There are many ways to do this pose on support, on a block, on bolsters. And if you know that, you can set that up or ask your teacher how can you modify the pose for your own body. And come forward, cross my legs, sit and stretch my legs forward in staff pose, Dandasana. And I really press my knees to the floor. I don't shake them out, I press them to the floor, open them and extend them. Now, Baddha Konāsana, bound angle pose. So this is the pose with the feet together and the knees apart. Often, you'll run into the same issue with the pelvis, right? This kind of position in the pose, where the buttocks is getting scooped underneath deeply and the sacrum is dropping to the floor. So I highly recommend, you can sit on the blanket a few ways, but I particularly like using the corner of the blanket. So I put the corner and I sit on it just so it's supporting the sitting bones. And so I use this height, coupled with the pressure of my hands, to really lift the sacrum up, move it in, lift the lower back upwards. So instead of the lower back descending and the sacrum descending, I really lift upwards. Right? So this is the position I'm in to begin. So simultaneously using the pressure of the hands and the height of the blanket to lift the spine upwards, but then I press the outer borders of the feet, lengthen from the inner groins to the knees, and attempt to descend the knees in the direction of the floor. Now once I'm here, I can then stretch forward in the pose. Adho Mukha Baddha Konāsana, downward facing Baddha Konāsana. Beginning by taking the hands to the feet, opening the feet up. And as I do so, descending the knees and starting to hinge forward once again. I use the pressure of my arms into my thighs to both press them down and also lengthen from the groin to the knee and extend forward. From here I can also extend my arms straight forward. Now, Konāsana, wide leg pose. I employ my blanket in the same fashion, sitting on the corner, now with my legs extended wide. When you sit in this pose, adjust the buttocks, adjust the legs so that once again you're sitting upright. You're not kind of retreating backwards with the legs rolling back. So use a sufficient height under the buttocks so that you actually start well lifted in the pose. And then continuing this notion of lengthening from the groin to the knee, I stretch all the way from the groin, through the knee, through the heel, outwards, as I press my legs down to the floor. Now from this position, Parshva Upavishta Konāsana, twisting Upavishta Konāsana. First stage is I just turn from the upright position. This is why it's essential to sit high, because the twist will gain most of its benefit from its height. It's like a towel. When you wring out a towel, you want it to be long, and then you twist it, you don't bunch it together. So from this lift now, I turn, one hand in front of the thigh, one hand behind, either onto the blanket or the floor behind you, and begin the turn here. So it's an upright twist, but as I twist, I really extend down through the leg behind me. I continue that extension and that stretch. Now from here I reach up. Second stage, reaching forward and catching the outer border of the foot. If the foot isn't there, you have a belt that you had earlier, and you can hold it in the loop. The loop is a great tool as opposed to just the belt itself. So either way, I use my other hand to post onto the floor, and I press down, lift up, and I continue the turn. At first, I'm not too concerned about stretching forward. I use every inhalation to stretch upwards, every exhale to pull back on the belt of the foot to rotate. Then, either catching the foot or the belt, I'll use a few exhalations to turn and go down. Eventually crossing the hands and folding forward. It's also fine to keep this hand to the side to keep you balanced over the leg that you're extending towards. Lift on the inhalation. As I exhale, I pull and really cultivate the turning from the arm through that same side shoulder blade and ribs. Adho Mukha Upavishta Konāsana, or going forward in Upavishta Konāsana. I reach out and clasp the big toes with the first two fingers and the thumb. I can also hold the shin bones. I can also use two belts around each of the feet, or in fact even take the hands in front. But at the beginning, wherever my hands are, I inhale, I lift the chest up, press my legs down, and then exhale, begin to extend forward into the pose. Now, if there's a point at which you're kind of hanging in front, that you're going to hold the pose for a while, better to place the hands down in front and really work on that extension from the legs through the heels that I mentioned a moment ago. So either coming forward with arms in front or holding the big toes. Of course, it might not be so accessible at first, but in time it will come. And lastly, Siddhasana. Siddhasana is the pose of the siddhas, of the perfected beings. And this is a nice pose to finish this on, because not only is it a pose that can be used for pranayama, for breathing practices, or for meditation, but it also will benefit from having done some of the other work on the hips. So with my legs in front, watch, I hold inside my knee, the other hand under the foot, and I'm going to start to turn the foot towards the ceiling, this way, like in Baddha Konāsana. And I use this hand behind the knee to really soften the tendons, the muscles there, and I bring the foot back so that the heel is in line with the perineum, the pubis. Same thing this side. Heel in front of heel. Now I'm still sitting on that corner of a blanket, and so if the knees tend to pop up, you can also elevate that height a little bit. So this is a fine position to be in. This would be the stage one of the position. Then I also can take this foot and sneak it and tuck it between the calf and the thigh of the other leg. And even more so, I can take the big toe of the bottom foot and start to bring it upwards between the calf and the thigh of the other leg. Extend my arms. Join my thumb and index finger together in Jnana Mudra, the seal of knowledge, and sit well. You can sit for a while, cultivate that Ujjayi breathing, smooth, soft, regulated inhalations and exhalations if you're familiar, or just sit comfortably. Release by sliding the legs out, stretching them for a moment, and then I switch sides. Stage one, heel in front of heel. Stage two, tucking the top foot. And stage three, just a minor difference, trying to bring that other foot up a bit. Extend the legs once again. And release the knees by stretching my legs and pressing the thighs and knees towards them. So this sequence can be followed. You do Shavasana, or if it's maybe kind of mixed in with another practice, perhaps you do the shoulder sequence that I showed before, and then this, and that's quite a nice practice of openings, as it were. By and large, if the hips are very stiff, if all the musculature around the hips is very stiff, then the standing asanas, which you would learn in general classes, are the way to go. right? This is more later on when you're supplementing that work with some seated postures, some really focused exercises and asanas. But by and large, the standing poses will create that freedom that you can then go a little bit deeper when you come down to the mat. So I thank you all for watching, and I thank you on behalf of the Intermountain Iyengar Yoga Association, and hopefully this has been of some service to your practice in the days, months, years to come. Thank you so much.